Hey folks, so this particular video is going to discuss peer review and hopefully give you folks some strategies and some techniques in order to constructively critique the work of your peers. Now, many of you have probably done peer review in some shape or form in the past. Maybe it was in an English 101 class, maybe it was in some other class that you took. It could have even been in high school where you had to, read the work of somebody else and offer some type of feedback with regard to what it is that they wrote. So it might be a little bit of a review, but I'm going to try to give you some specific ways of looking at peer review that might offer some insight, might prove to be helpful as far as offering that constructive criticism to your peers. Now again, you have a poem that's due on Tuesday, so you're going to post that to your group section in Gulnet. For Thursday's class, in addition to having the quiz, in addition to the readings that you folks are going to have, you're also going to have to produce a 2 to 3 page critique for your peer, as well as for me, because I'm going to be looking to see what kinds of critique and what kinds of criticism you're giving to folks. Okay, so if you have 4 people in your group, including yourself, you are going to have to write 3 critiques, 2 to 3 paragraphs each. If you only have 3, including yourself in a group, you're just going to have to give 2 to 3 paragraph critiques for the folks in the group. And so what do those critiques look like? What is it specifically that you do for that? Really, it's this idea of peer review, right? You talk about what's working well, what's not working well, offer some suggestions, some strategies, things they might be able to do. I'm expecting that you folks are not only going to offer that commentary as a separate document, but that you're going to write on and do comments on the work themselves, right? So if somebody posts a document to Gulnet, you can actually take that, whether you print it off or probably using the comment function in Word, offer some critiques and suggestions. So I'll show you that in a sec. But here it is, peer review, right? And how exactly do you go about doing peer review and everything else? So let's go ahead and let's look at this. So the strategies, techniques, etc. So what is peer review? Just to review with you folks here, when we talk about in that classroom, that educational setting, it's really collaborative work. You're working and you're doing writing somewhat in isolation initially, right? You're taking your own thoughts and your perspectives and your ideas, and you're trying to create something, right? Whether it's a poem or a short story. You start from this initial place of you, and then you try to branch it out, as we've talked about in class before. But really, in order for it to get better, it's good to get the feedback and critique of other people to see how they're perceiving the work. So it is really a collaborative effort. It gives you a basis, it gives you an understanding that you have a knowledgeable community of peers that can offer certain critiques on pieces of writing in order to help improve that work yourself. So what are some of the benefits? This is just kind of a short list, right? It gives you a wider audience for your writing. Again, you could write things for yourself all day long. You can just keep a secret notebook of poems or short stories and never show them to anybody, and that's fine, because it might make you feel better, it might help you process things that are going on in your life or in the world. But when you're taking a class, when you are actually putting your work before other people, you have to be mindful of how other people might perceive that work. So it gives you a sense of audience. Okay. It gives you the opportunity to receive that feedback from someone other than me. I'm not the only voice in the room, right? I maybe have a certain, extended level of experience with these different genres and writing them and critiquing them and all those kinds of things. But as I've said in class, each of you has your own background and your own experiences and the way that you read things that is valuable for other folks to know about. It gives you the ability to critically examine the work of others and apply some of that analysis to your own work. Again, as I've said in class, one of the best things you can maybe take away from the course is to try to distance yourself a little bit from your own work, right? To not hold on to it so tightly. We create this thing and we think, well, that was a piece of me. I had this inspiration, or I had this particular thought, and I polished it and I did all these things to it. It's mine. I hold it really near and dear to my heart. Well, that can be stifling in some instances, right? If you can remove yourself from that work and really look at it with a critical eye as an audience member might, then you might be able to improve that work even more. So that's what we're trying to develop too. Gives you the ability to see that you need multiple drafts, right? I have you folks do portfolios for this class, and that's for a reason, because the more you revise, the more your work's going to improve. It gives you another way to practice your writing. It could be formatting stuff, style, you could be playing around with line breaks, you could be playing around with character plot, whatever it might be. Models the type of communication that's going to be required, right? Some of you folks certainly I know are concerned with the what happens when I leave college, right, and getting a job someday. Well, if you're going to get a job someday, more than likely you're going to be working with other people. You're going to have to do group work. You're going to have to do group problem solving. So this is part of that, even though it's your own creative work, right? So are there different types of peer review? Sure. I'm not going to necessarily go through and read all of these, right? But there's an anonymous or blind reviewed kind of peer review where nobody knows who submitted what. And the reason for that is, we tend to be a little more honest when we don't know whose work it is we're critiquing. We might have a friend in the class, we might not have anything against anyone in the class. And again, you're not trying to offer all negative criticism. You're not trying to do it in a mean way, right? You're trying to offer positive critique and positive criticism of what's just not working for you or what you don't maybe understand as a reader. You're not necessarily ripping it to shreds, right? But folks have a tendency to be a little bit more honest if it's anonymous. Face-to-face, one-on-one, that's the stuff that usually happens in class, right? So if we do a larger group kind of peer review, or we break you folks off into smaller groups, that kind of thing, it's more of that one-to-one kind of thing. And we do have that larger group one as well. So one-to-one actually is more of that, you're working with one other person in a group is where we might have the full workshop thing happening. So are there concerns? Sure, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you what some of the concerns were about peer review. Sometimes folks focus a little bit too much on service concerns, right? So things like, the uses of commas or the uses of this, that, or the other. Word choice. In poetry, though, those things can be really important, right? How commas can create pauses, how a certain word has a certain type of connotation that might mean several different things. So those things are, are certainly valid, I think. Maybe in other types of works, when you're particularly drafting early on, like a short story or an essay, maybe those things aren't necessarily as important. Comments might be too vague, not helpful. If you folks say, yep, it's good, does nothing. There's absolutely nothing for somebody. Makes us feel good maybe, and that's always nice, but doesn't do anything in terms of offering the writer something that they can take away with. What was it that made it so good? Right? So they can maybe replicate that or do it again or do it in another way. Also, if you say, stinks, it's terrible, I don't like it, right? Again, does nothing, doesn't say what it was that wasn't working, right? It's not that it stinks, it's not that it's terrible, it's not that it's awful, it's just that maybe something isn't working at this given moment, and what could you do to help make it work, right? Comments might be overly critical, hostile, or even sarcastic. That's what I don't want you folks to do, right? And I don't think any of you folks necessarily would, but saying something like, this is awful, this is terrible, you should just, go and, walk out in front of traffic and not look both ways. Again, that's doing nothing, right, to help anybody in terms of improving their work. Everyone's at different levels of their writing. And one of the ideas behind peer review is also this concept of zone of proximal development, good old Vygotsky, okay? This idea of everyone in the class is at different levels, right? Somebody might be down here, somebody might be up here, somebody else might be up here. And if we're pairing you folks with different individuals, right? Somebody that might be a writer that's kind of maybe here, and somebody else is right here, by this person helping this person, it bumps them up to their level, and by helping this person, that person still keeps inching themselves up as well, as far as their own ability to write and notice things and critically analyze things. Author might feel ganged up on, or peer reviewers might try to take control of the work. Ultimately, folks, this is your work, right? It's your poem, it's your short story, it's your essay, it's your play, it's any of those things. Even with my critiques, right? Again, I have maybe a certain level of expertise, right? A certain level of experience with these different kinds of genres. And I'm just trying to lend you folks my perspective about these things. But you ultimately can take it or you can leave it. You can decide, I don't agree with anything you have to say, Dr. DiSarro. I don't agree with anything that anybody in my group has to say. Okay, that's fine, because it's your work. You're entitled to that. Again, we're offering suggestions on ways that you could potentially improve it, right? You are being graded in the class, which adds another layer to this. So you might want to heed some suggestions, right? Or at least try to play around and work with some of those suggestions. But, ultimately it's your work. You do with it as you please. So some suggestions for facilitating a good peer review session. Read the entire draft before giving commentary, right? So particularly as we get into longer works, right? Give yourself enough time to read the entire draft. Generally, I'm not giving you folks a huge turnaround time here. It might just be one class period or 2 days, right? But you want to give yourself enough time to read it before you really offer any kind of quick commentary. Don't start reading it and start commenting on it as you're reading it. Go ahead and read through the entire work first before you do anything. Again, give yourself sufficient time to respond to the work, as I said. some instances, particularly when we do, breaking folks up into smaller groups or doing the workshop kind of stuff in a larger group setting, I might give you a peer review sheet, right? And if anything's unclear with that, go ahead and ask me. Be nice, right? Offer constructive criticism about the areas that need improvement, right? None of those negative comments. Folks ever hear the compliment sandwich, right? You start off with something like, this was working really well. I really liked how you did this. There's these other things that aren't working particularly well, but also you did these things that were really nice, right? So you have the kind of the bread, the meat, and the bread. Okay, compliment sandwich. So that might be one technique. Make text-specific comments. Don't use, again, vague terms like, this is awkward, this is unclear, I don't understand. A little more specificity, particularly when you're doing those 2 to 3 paragraph responses, right? What was it? Was it that the line breaks were working really well or weren't, right? Why weren't they working well? Did it create too much of a pause? Did a certain word not necessarily make sense and you don't necessarily know how it pertains to anything that's being discussed? As we get into some of the other things, right? Do you lose track of the plot? Do you really think that this character would do something like that or say something like that? Is the dialogue believable? Whatever it might be. Don't just say this is awkward or this is unclear. Be very specific about what's awkward or unclear. Focus on some major issues, right? Don't necessarily overwhelm the writer, because you can revise and revise and revise. There's this great line, it's escaping me who said it at the moment, but, poems are never finished, they're just abandoned, right? And I think that might be true of all creative writing, right? Whether it's a short story or an essay or a novel or whatever, it's not that it's ever finished, it's just that you abandon it at some point. You can't really take it any further, or it's kind of been done over, but you don't want to overwhelm the writer with everything they could do with it. So focus on some very specific issues that you think are major issues. And make reasonable suggestions, right? Saying to rewrite the entire essay or short story or paper or poem isn't necessarily feasible, right? Give them a point to start from. Make some reasonable suggestions on the way that they could improve it. And before giving written feedback to the author, reread your own comments. Make sure that you're being clear about what you're suggesting and what makes sense. Okay. So how does a typical peer review look? I'll give you folks one example. So we're going to be working with poems first. Okay. So I actually am part of a writers group that recently started up at Endicott. And so last week, actually, we submitted our first bit of work. And so this is one of the poems that I submitted to the writers group. And they offered some wonderful suggestions about ways that I can improve my poem. And I'll share some of those with you in a sec. I haven't gone back, I haven't revised anything yet, but I'll share with you some of the things they said. So here's an example of a poem. So you're submitting one poem this week. So say this poem came across in your thread there in GoalNet, okay? So I'll just read it first. I used to play in bands. In the crowd there were always sad women, striped socks, tattoos, the names of ex-husbands straining against low cotton tops, and there would be their dates leaning on their ladies or over their dollar pitchers, sharing smokes in the halo of second chances. And then there was me behind a vellum of laughter, black frames and grungy sweaters, naked really, as the crowd thinned out, left to pick up cigarettes, inspect for lipstick, feel my tongue flick against the filter, and ignite. Okay, so what did my group say? Suggestions, right? You folks might read this and think, well, I think it's fine, right? But again, you really have to maybe dig and think about what are some of the things. I certainly, upon submitting this to folks, I didn't submit it because I thought it was perfect or that, it was even something that could be publishable at this point. It's a work in progress, right? So what were some of the things that my group members said? They said perhaps even I didn't even the first line, right? In the crowd. Could I just say and start the poem from the point of there were always sad women? Because when you say I used to play in bands, the crowd is implied. It's a very valid point, okay? So starting, there were always sad women, striped socks, tattoos, the names of ex-husbands straining, etc., okay? The use of there. If you'll notice here, there's one there, and then there's another there, and then there, right? Oh, and I caught another one, there was there. So even it's maybe word choice, right? There's a lot of different forms of there, okay? Could I cut some of those things out? Excessive words, wordiness, those kinds of things. More description was one of the things they said, really getting to see these individuals, the women or the men, their dates, etc. Actually seeing the crowd as it thinned out. What did that look like? Is there some type of image or some type of metaphor? Other than saying the crowd thinned out, what's an image that's comparable to the crowd thinning out? Could I talk about those things? those are just some suggestions, right? There are several others that they gave me, but that's kind of what we're looking for. Okay. Now, again, if I were to say, you have somebody's poem here and you're going to leave some comments, if you have Microsoft Word, for example, and you highlight that, and you have a pretty recent version of Microsoft Word, and you click Review, you have this thing here where you can leave comments, right? You click New Comment, and you could put, how does the crowd look when it thins out? Is there an image you would use here? See? So you can actually leave it on the draft themselves, and that's okay. Because again, ultimately, it's that writer's work. They can take your suggestions, they can leave them, okay? But when we take a class, when we're taking an intro career brand class, and we understand that we're going to be sharing each other's work here, you're giving up a little bit of it, right? You're allowing other people to read it, to consume it, to critique it. It's just part of the deal. It's part of the game, okay? That's what you have to do. So that's my spiel on peer review. That's my spiel on how to maybe offer some of these kind of suggestions. What are some of the things you can talk about and think about, etc. Okay. Again, I apologize. Obviously, due to the circumstances, I can't be in class on Tuesday. I will be back for our Thursday class, though. But this is the work I want you folks to do. Okay. You know what you need to do. Keep up on the readings. Make sure you're preparing for that because there is going to be a quiz on Thursday. And post those poems. Offer strong critiques for your peers. Help them out. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns, feel free to contact me. I'm going to be checking my email periodically while I'm away. But feel free to contact me if something really comes up, okay? Looking forward to seeing what you folks have. I'll talk to you soon.